everything changes. The moment you realize a fear was never your enemy, it was your invitation, not a force to be crushed, but a whisper from the depths of your soul saying, there's more to see. Most of us have been taught that fear is something to fight, push through it, conquer it, dominate it. But what if that very approach has kept you locked in the same invisible cage, chasing freedom while unknowingly running from yourself? Carl Jung saw what most of us miss. He understood that fear isn't here to destroy you, it's here to reveal you. And if you've ever felt like no matter how hard you try to silence your fears, they just come back louder, more insistent, this is why. You can't mute what's meant to be understood. You can't outrun the parts of yourself that are begging to be seen. Every fear you carry has a face, a story, a root. But you've been told to ignore it, to rise above it, to treat it like a flaw. And in doing that, you've only buried the gold deeper. Because fear isn't random, it's intelligent, it's precise. It knows where you're wounded, and it knows where your potential is buried. So when fear shows up, it's not punishment. It's a signal. Not to act recklessly, but to get still, to get curious, to ask yourself, what truth have I been too afraid to admit? What part of me have I disowned, hoping it would disappear? And what if facing that, not fighting it, is the real path to strength? This is what Jung meant when he said fear is a messenger, a message from the unconscious, from the part of you that's still holding pieces of your story that haven't been heard. Not because you're weak, but because you were never shown how to listen. You've been taught to keep going, to stay strong, to hold it all together. But the strength you're searching for won't come from pretending fear doesn't exist. It comes from learning how to sit with it, to welcome it like a teacher, to ask it what it knows that you don't yet. Think about the fear that haunts you most, the one you try not to name, the one that shows up in your silence, your hesitation, your self-doubt. That fear holds a doorway, and the longer you avoid it, the more power it gains. But the moment you turn toward it with awareness, not to win but to understand, everything begins to shift. You stop seeing fear as a wall and start seeing it as a mirror reflecting the parts of yourself you left behind. The child who was told they were too much or not enough, the dream you gave up on to feel safe, the truth you buried to belong. And here's the paradox. What you're most afraid to feel is often the very thing that will set you free, not by removing the fear, but by reclaiming the power you gave away to avoid it. That's the beginning of integration. That's individuation. The journey back to yourself, not the self you were told to be, but the one you've always been becoming. So no, you don't need more courage. You need more honesty. You don't need to force your way through fear. You need to feel your way into it. Let it show you where the real work is. Let it lead you not into panic, but into presence. Because the moment you stop trying to destroy your fear and start listening to it, that's when the real transformation begins. Not in war, but in awareness. Not in resistance, but in surrender. And in that surrender, you find a strength no fear can ever shake. Individuation isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a slow unfolding, a lifelong journey of returning to who you were always meant to be, beneath the masks, the roles, the conditioning. It doesn't demand the annihilation of fear, but a deep willingness to meet it face to face. Not with armor, not with resistance, but with presence. Fear isn't the enemy, it's the invitation. It shows up not to paralyze you, but to pull you closer to the parts of yourself you've been taught to abandon. Carl Jung understood this better than most. To him, fear wasn't some random glitch in the system. It was a compass, a sacred signal from the unconscious that something vital has been forgotten, ignored, or buried. We've been conditioned to treat fear like a fire to be extinguished, quickly, efficiently, without question. We numb it, fight it, silence it. But this approach misses the point entirely. Fear doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be heard. Because behind every tremble, every tightening of the chest, every moment you feel like running, there's a deeper truth asking to be seen. Fear is intelligent. It doesn't just show up for no reason. It comes when something within you is misaligned, when you've strayed too far from your essence, when a forgotten part of you is ready to be remembered. Take anxiety. In today's world, we rush to label it as a disorder, something to eliminate at all costs. We drown it in medication, distractions, denial. But what if anxiety isn't a malfunction? What if it's a message? What if it's your psyche screaming out, there's something here you're not willing to feel? That ache in your chest, the weight in your stomach, that nagging unease, it might just be your soul trying to bring you back to what matters. Jung would ask, what is this anxiety asking you to confront? What truth are you hiding from? What have you exiled from your awareness because it felt too heavy, too ugly, too painful to bear? Even our strangest fears, the ones that don't seem to make any sense, hold wisdom. That fear of being seen, of being left, of failing, of speaking up, it's all rooted in something much older. These aren't random emotions. They're echoes from deeper layers of your being. They're reflections of an inner terrain shaped by your past, by your family, by generations who came before you. And it's not just personal. Jung spoke of the collective unconscious, a vast, shared psychic inheritance that every human being carries. Within this reservoir live ancient symbols, archetypes, patterns. Your fears, as personal as they feel, are also part of a much larger story. The fear of death? That's not just yours. It's humanity's. It's the echo of every soul that's ever walked the edge of existence. The fear of abandonment. That too reaches back to the earliest cries of the infant needing its mother, to the ancient yearning for safety, connection, and love. These aren't just your wounds. They're the scars of the entire human family. And there's something powerful that happens when you see it this way, when you realize that you're not alone, that your fear isn't a defect but a doorway, a mirror showing you where your healing lies, and maybe for the first time you stop judging it, you stop pushing it away. Instead, you get curious, you lean in, you ask what it's trying to teach you, because beneath every fear is a part of yourself waiting to come home. To truly understand fear, we have to understand the human psyche the way Jung did, not as a single mind, but as a layered living system. There's the ego, the conscious self that navigates the world. There's the shadow, holding all the parts of us we've disowned. There's the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies. There's the self, the totality of who we are, and deep beneath it all, the collective unconscious. Each part has its own language, its own needs, its own voice. Fear often speaks from the places we've forgotten, the childhood wound that never healed, the truth we weren't ready to face, the emotion we pushed down to survive. It's the unconscious reaching out, not to punish you, but to awaken you. It doesn't come to hurt you, it comes to reunite you with the fullness of who you are. So instead of running from it, what if you sat with it? What if you listened, not to conquer it, but to understand what it's been trying to tell you all along? It might not even be your fear. It could be something carried through your bloodline, passed down silently, woven into the fabric of your being before you ever had a chance to question it. The weight of generations, of wounds left unspoken and lives on inside you. That's why the idea of conquering fear like an enemy rarely works. You can't defeat what you haven't yet taken the time to understand. You can't silence what you haven't first allowed to speak. Carl Jung didn't see fear as something to battle into submission. He saw it as something to be decoded, listened to, held with presence. Jung broke down in the human psyche into three major layers: the conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. And fear, he believed, could be found in all three. On the surface, fear seems simple. You feel nervous before a big decision, afraid to speak in front of a crowd, anxious about losing someone you love. These are the fears we can name, tied to specific events, recognize when they show up. But Jung warned that these fears are often just surface-level symptoms. The real roots lie deeper, buried in the unconscious, hidden behind the stories we no longer remember telling ourselves. A fear of public speaking, for example, might have very little to do with the act of speaking. It might be a trigger, an echo of something older, a childhood moment of humiliation, a memory of not being heard, a time you were laughed at, dismissed, made to feel invisible. That moment may be buried, long forgotten, but its emotional imprint lingers. This is the domain of the personal unconscious, the place where we store everything we've repressed or disowned. Pain, rejection, shame, lost dreams. They all live here, quietly shaping our behavior from the shadows. And that shadow, Jung's most famous concept, is where fear often gathers the most power. The shadow isn't some external darkness. It's the collection of parts within you that you've pushed away. The parts you've been told are too much, too weak, too strange. It holds everything you've labeled unacceptable. Your anger, your softness, your jealousy, your sensitivity. And when you deny those parts, fear becomes the guard at the gate, rising up to stop you from seeing what's been locked away. A person who prides themselves on being confident might feel paralyzed by the idea of vulnerability. Not because vulnerability is dangerous, but because it threatens the identity they've spent a lifetime building. That fear, then, is not irrational. It's sacred. It's pointing towards a piece of the self begging to be reclaimed. But here's the tragedy. Most people never listen. They treat fear like a virus to be eradicated. They seek distractions, band-aid solutions, anything to avoid the discomfort of going inward. But no matter how far you run, the shadow follows. It doesn't punish, it reminds. It reflects. It tries, again and again, to show you what you've abandoned. And then, beneath even that personal unconscious, Jung spoke of something more ancient, the collective unconscious, a deep well shared by all of humanity. This is where archetypes live, universal images and stories that repeat across cultures and time, and many of these archetypes are intimately tied to fear. The mother, the trickster, the wise old man, the hero. The hero is one we all recognize, the one who rises against adversity, who fights dragons, who saves the day. But look closer, and you'll see the truth. Every hero must first ascend. Every hero must step into the unknown, into darkness, into fear. The monsters they fight are rarely just beasts. They are symbols of inner demons, of wounds, of truths too long buried. The underworld they enter, that's not some mythological place. It's the unconscious. It's the part of the journey where the familiar is stripped away, and all that's left is what you've tried not to face. We all live some version of that story. And the monsters we run from, those fears that feel too big, too overwhelming, they aren't here to destroy us. They're here to initiate us. Because transformation doesn't happen in the absence of fear. It happens when you dare to look directly at what terrifies you and see not a threat, but a teacher. The shadow doesn't knock before it enters. It lives in the corners of our being and the places we refuse to look, in the truths we deny not just as individuals but as societies. It's not just our rage, jealousy, or shame. It's also our brilliance, our untapped strength, the parts of us we buried to be accepted. The reason we fear the shadow isn't because it's evil, but because it holds too much of what we're not ready to face. And yet, Carl Jung believed that to live fully, to live honestly, we must face it. Not just glance at it and look away, but truly stand before it and let it speak. He called this process individuation, the slow and often painful unfolding of the self, a return to our essence by embracing every forgotten, rejected, and misunderstood part of who we are. And fear in this journey is not an obstacle. It's a compass. It's not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just a tightness in the chest, a hesitation not before a leap, a whisper that says, "This matters." Because we only fear what matters. We only fear what has the power to change us. Imagine someone stuck in a job that drains their soul. They dream of leaving, of doing something that feels alive, but every time they come close, fear paralyzes them. Not just fear of failing or losing income, but a deeper fear, the fear of letting go, of who they were taught to be. Fear of stepping into the unknown and possibly finding a self they don't yet recognize. That fear is not random. It's the soul's alarm clock, ringing at the exact moment when growth is possible, but terrifying. Jung compared this to entering a cave. The kind of cave that makes your heart race before you even step inside. But inside, past the panic, past the illusions, lies something sacred, the treasure of self-knowledge, courage, clarity, and above all, truth. What we find in that darkness isn't a monster. It's the parts of us we left behind when we learned to survive instead of thrive. Fear has always been a doorway. It's why the most profound transformations often come wrapped in dread. Midlife crises, breakdowns, silent nights filled with questions that have no answers. These aren't breakdowns. They're breakthroughs waiting to happen. When people hit that point where everything familiar begins to feel foreign, when their reflection starts to look like a stranger, that's when the real work begins. Not the kind of work you can fix with a 5-step plan or an affirmation done on your mirror. The real work is descent. The kind that strips away the noise until you're left with only what's real. But that's not how the world teaches us to deal with fear. The world says eliminate it. Distract yourself. Meditate it away. Manifest it into something prettier. But Jung asked a different question. What if fear isn't a disease to cure, but a guide to follow? What if the fear is not there to destroy you, but to deliver you? To show you the fracture lines in your soul, the places that ache for healing, for attention, for light. Fear, in this way, becomes a sacred messenger. It tells you where you are still enslaved by false beliefs, where you're still hiding, where you're still bleeding from old wounds. And if you stop running, if you sit with it, breathe through it, and ask it what it wants to show you, It will take you deeper than you've ever been. This is not easy work. It doesn't promise comfort. It doesn't offer an instant peace. But what it does offer is something far more valuable. Wholeness. The kind of wholeness that isn't about being perfect, but about it being real. About reclaiming every lost part of your spirit and standing in the fullness of who you are. Jung knew the truth. We do not become whole by chasing the light. We become whole by making peace with the dark. Fear never truly disappears when ignored. It simply changes shape. It slips beneath the surface and resurfaces in disguise, as anxiety that coils in your chest for no reason you can name, as a heaviness that keeps you stuck, as tension that lingers in your shoulders long after the moment has passed. It becomes a silent language your body speaks when your mind refuses to listen. The only way transformation begins is when you stop trying to silence fear, and instead ask it why it's there. It's not a comfortable process. It requires you to be brave, and yes, but even more than that, it demands you be gentle with yourself. Because this isn't a battle to win. It's a relationship to heal. Carl Jung believed that fear was intimately tied to the idea of freedom. Not because we must conquer fear to be free, but because understanding fear unlocks the very door we thought was shut. Behind it are truths we've buried for years. Truths we didn't want to look at because we weren't ready. But once revealed, they change everything. They dissolve the scripts we've been blindly following. They allow us to choose again, consciously, deliberately, and in alignment with who we really are. This isn't just a beautiful idea meant to live in books. It has to find its place in real life, in messy mornings and late-night doubts. Theory only matters when it breathes inside your story, like Mariana's. Mariana had everything that looks like success, a career that many envied, respect from her peers, and a life that sparkled on the outside. But any time she was asked to lead a high-stakes project or speak in front of a crowd, something inside her froze. She brushed it off. Said she just wasn't a fan of the spotlight. But that wasn't the whole truth. And deep down, she knew it. It wasn't until she sat with someone trained to help her look beneath the surface that a deeper layer revealed itself. Her fear wasn't about the spotlight. It was about being seen in it. Truly seen. Seen with all of her flaws, her mistakes, her unfinished edges. As a child, she had learned that being wrong was dangerous, that failure came with consequences, so she worked harder than anyone to never make a mistake again. But that fear didn't vanish. It went underground. And it lived in the parts of her that couldn't relax, couldn't take risks, couldn't breathe unless everything was under control. When she began to explore the part of her that trembled behind the perfection, something shifted. She realized fear wasn't her enemy. It was her mirror. It was showing her the place that needed the most love. And when she embraced that, when she let herself be human instead of flawless, she found a freedom she had never known. Not freedom from fear, but freedom within it. And then there's Raphael, a gifted artist who didn't create for years. He claimed inspiration had left him, that he was just waiting for the right moment, the right spark. But that was only the story he told the world. Deep down, what held him back wasn't a lack of inspiration. It was a storm of self-doubt. Not fear of critics, but fear of the voice inside him. The one that said he wasn't good enough, that every brushstroke was a mistake, that no matter how hard he tried, he would never be worthy of the praise he craved. This voice didn't come from nowhere. It was part of his shadow, the pieces of him he had pushed away but never truly escaped. And Jung's work gave him the map to find them, to sit with them, to listen. When he realized that the harshest critic lived inside his own mind, something powerful happened. He stopped waiting for perfection. He picked up his tools again, not to impress anyone else, but to speak his truth, to express, not to perform. And in that act, he reclaimed the part of himself he thought he had lost. Fear will always be there. But when we choose to understand it, to look it in the eyes instead of running away, it transforms. It becomes a guide. It becomes a compass pointing toward the parts of us still waiting to be seen. And that is where the real freedom begins. There is a cave. Dark, cold, and uninviting. Most people pass by it, never stepping foot inside, because just standing at its mouth stirs something ancient in them. Fear. But what if that cave isn't just darkness? What if it's where your greatest treasure is hidden? That's what Jung believed. He saw fear not as a wall, but as a doorway, a signpost that something sacred is waiting behind the discomfort. For Mariana, it was the deep ache of never feeling enough. She spent years hiding behind masks, avoiding mirrors, running from her own reflection. But when she finally stepped into Nelwyn's cave, when she stopped trying to be perfect and started accepting every crooked edge of herself, she found peace. Not because her flaws disappeared, but because she stopped waging war against them. For Raphael, it was different. He wasn't scared of being seen. He was terrified of being judged. A brilliant mind, silenced by the fear of other people's opinions. He'd hold back, censor his ideas, let his creativities die quietly in the corners of his notebooks. Until one day, he stopped asking for permission. He walked straight into the fire of his fear and realized the judgment he was so afraid of was nothing compared to the pain of suppressing who he really was. But fear doesn't just show up in our personal lives. What you see, it creeps into our relationships too. The fear of abandonment, for example, can be paralyzing. It whispers that you're not worth staying for. It convinces you to keep your guard up, to push people away before they can walk out. Or it drives you to cling too tightly, trying to control every outcome so you're never left behind. Jung understood this fear as more than just an emotional wound. He saw it as the wounded lover archetype, a soul's craving connection, but still bleeding from old betrayals. And the moment you stop blaming others and instead turn inward to explore where this fear was born, you begin to break the pattern. What once looked like a toxic relationship might actually be a mirror, reflecting a part of you begging to be healed. The first step isn't dramatic, it's quiet. You begin by noticing. You ask the fear, not why it's there, but what it wants you to see. The next time your heart races, your hands sweat, your stomach turns, don't escape it. Stay. Ask, what are you trying to show me? That question alone can lead you somewhere deeper than years of avoidance ever could. And you'll start to see patterns. Maybe it's always in moments of vulnerability, or when your baby's about to speak your truth, or when you get too close to someone, and instinct tells you to run. These aren't just habits, they're messages, clues pointing toward the areas you've buried. Write them down. Don't just think about your fear. Put it into words. There's a strange kind of power that comes from naming it. It's like turning on a light in a room that's been dark for years. Suddenly what felt monstrous becomes something you can understand, something you can work with. And then the shadow comes into focus. The parts of yourself you pretend don't exist, the anger, the jealousy, the shame, the insecurity, they're all tied to fear, not because you're broken, but because somewhere along the way, you were taught to exile those pieces. But they don't disappear. They wait. And the longer you avoid them, the louder your fear becomes. But here's the paradox. When you turn and face what you've spent years avoiding, the fear loses its grip. Mariana found that when she stood still and faced her inner critic, it didn't scream anymore. Raphael learned that judgment couldn't hurt him if he stopped handing it power, and what they both discovered was the same thing. Freedom doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from understanding the fear and choosing to act anyway. This is what Jung meant by the hero's journey. Not dragons and swords, but the quiet battle within. It's a journey through the underworld of your own mind, where the real monsters are self-doubt and shame, but also where the gold is hidden. At the deepest level of who we are lies something Jung called the collective unconscious, a vast ocean of inherited memory. A psychic blueprint shaped by thousands of years of human experience, and within it, archetypes, recurring themes that show up across every culture and every story. Fear in this context is not random, it's universal. The fear of death, the fear of rejection, the fear of the unknown. These aren't yours alone. They are part of the fabric of humanity. Myths, legends, and dreams across time echo with them. Stories of facing beasts, walking through darkness, stepping into the unknown. And perhaps that's why fear feels so heavy, because it carries not just your own wounds, but echoes of every soul who came before you. Jung called this the collective shadow. The parts of our history we try to forget, both individually and as a society. But here's the truth. What you fear most is not always what's wrong with you. Sometimes it's the doorway to your deepest truth. Because the treasure isn't in avoiding the cave. It's buried deep inside it. But beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. That resistance isn't just hesitation. It's fear wearing 1,000 different masks. The fear of failure, the fear of starting over, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of not being enough. And yet, all of it traces back to something far more ancient, the fear of stepping into the unknown. Jung believed that when we avoid fear, we aren't just avoiding discomfort, we are avoiding our own becoming. Every time we suppress an impulse to change, to grow, to move towards something more aligned with who we really are, we aren't just playing it safe. We're feeding the shadow. That is a hidden part of ourselves that thrives on routine, on comfort, on staying small. The archetypes help us make sense of these inner battles. The hero and the dragon. They are not characters in someone else's story. They live inside of you. The dragon isn't just external chaos or opposition. It's the part of yourself that clings to safety, that resists vulnerability, that guards the treasure of your potential. And the hero? That's the version of you who dares to go further, who feels the fear and steps forward anyway, knowing the risk, but willing to pay the price for something greater. Then there's the wise old man, a figure of insight, who appears only when you're ready to hear what you've spent your life avoiding. He doesn't flatter. He doesn't comfort. He tells the truth, and that truth often hurts before it heals. It demands that you look in the mirror and see yourself without illusion, to confront reality as it is, not as you wish it were. And what about the terrible father? That internal voice that shames, criticizes, and tells you you'll never be good enough. Sometimes it's the echo of a real figure from childhood. Sometimes it's a cultural voice or a societal pressure. But either way, it instills a fear so many carry. The fears of never measuring up, of constantly falling short of invisible standards. These archetypes aren't just psychological curiosities, they shape how we live, love, and make decisions, and they become even more active in times of collective crisis. During the CO-19 pandemic, people across the world were confronted by primal fears they didn't even know they had. Fear of disease, yes, but also fear of isolation, loss of control, economic collapse, death, and uncertainty. These weren't just individual concerns. They were echoes from the collective unconscious. Ancient fears awakened by modern circumstances. Jung saw such moments not as catastrophes, but as invitations, an opening, a rupture that could lead to a deeper kind of wholeness if we chose to walk through it. Because fear, especially when it comes from the collective shadow, reveals everything we've buried, both as individuals and as a society. The path forward isn't found in denial or distraction. It's found in an integration, in turning inward and asking, what are we really afraid of? And what is that fear pointing us toward? Integration starts with something simple but profound, recognition. You stop pretending you're not afraid. You admit it. You say it out loud. You name it. And in that act of naming, fear begins to loosen its grip. Then comes exploration. You trace the fear back, not just to a recent trigger or an isolated event, but to its roots. Was it learned in childhood? Was it modeled by those around you? Is it part of a larger cultural story you've unconsciously bought into? When you dig deep enough, fear becomes less of a threat and more of a message. And finally, transformation. Not by erasing the fear, but by using it, letting it teach you, guide you, push you. The pain becomes a compass. The resistance becomes a teacher. And the fear itself, once seen as the enemy, becomes the very tool for liberation. This is the hero's journey in motion, not in a fantasy tale, but in your daily life, in the sleepless nights, in the difficult conversations, in the moments when you feel the weight of your own limitations pressing down on you, and you choose to rise anyway. When the hero faces the dragon, the real battle is internal. The fire isn't just from the beast. It's from the self. The confrontation with fear is a confrontation with identity. And when the hero emerges from that trial, they are not the same. They have been changed, refined, made whole. Yet still, most people avoid the journey, not because they're weak, but because the pain of transformation often masquerades as comfort. It's easier to stay in the familiar, even when it hurts. It's easier to scroll, to binge, to complain, to procrastinate. All rituals of avoidance that feel safe, but leave you stuck. Jung warned that these patterns, while subtle, are not harmless. They are signs of inner conflict, manifestations of the shadow, not because you're bad or broken, but because you're human, and because part of you is scared to let go of the identity you've always known. Take something as common as the fear of changing careers. From the outside, it may look like laziness or indecision, but underneath, it's something far more sacred. It's a soul that senses it was made for more, but is terrified of letting go of the security it's built its identity around. It's the internal tug of war between duty and desire, between comfort and calling. But when you stop seeing fear as the enemy, when you begin to understand it as a sacred signal, everything changes. The resistance you once cursed becomes the threshold to something greater, and beyond that threshold, waiting quietly in the shadows, is the life you were always meant to live. But Jung would offer a deeper lens. He'd tell you that fear is not just something to survive, it's a signpost, a sacred messenger standing at the threshold of transformation. When that fear rises, the trembling before a decision, the anxiety before a change, it's not a signal to stop. It's the first invitation, a doorway, not just into something new, but into something real. This resistance, the ache to retreat into comfort, is not a failure of will. It's the very beginning of a process that could shift everything. Because while archetypes belong to all of us, how they show up is uniquely personal. The hero's journey, the shadow, the wounded child, the wise mentor, they don't appear in your life the way they do in stories or myths. They take the form of your daily struggles, your specific fears, the quiet patterns you've repeated for years without knowing why. And that's where Jung's real work begins. Not in abstract theory, but in the lived, messy experience of asking questions, the kind that don't always come with answers. What am I avoiding? What fears show up over and over in different costumes? What themes keep surfacing in my dreams? When does my body tighten and why? He didn't see these questions as intellectual games. He saw them as keys, tools to pry open the unconscious, to let in light. Because fear, in the Jungian view, is never just about the thing you think it's about. It's symbolic. It's layered. It's the language your psyche uses to tell you, look here. There's something buried, something waiting. And once you begin to truly look, fear starts to transform. Not vanish, but shift. It becomes a guide, a pointer toward growth. The fear of loneliness, for example, might seem like something to run from, but beneath it may be a hunger for deeper connection, not just with others, but with your own soul. The fear of failure might scream about inadequacy, but underneath it often lies a fragile link between your worth and your achievements, a link that, once seen, can begin to break. This is what Jung meant when he called fear a messenger. It's not arbitrary. It doesn't just arrive to torment or paralyze. It shows up when something inside you is knocking, asking to be seen. When you're at the edge of change, when you're closer to truth than you've ever been, even if it doesn't feel that way. And so when fear surfaces, Jung would ask, don't push it away. Sit with it. Ask what it's trying to say. Because every time fear emerges, it signals a turning point, a moment where you could retreat or walk forward, not blindly, but with awareness, with presence, with the knowledge that what lies beyond that fear is something essential. Some hidden truth, some forgotten piece of yourself that's been waiting. And this is the path of individuation. The journey not toward perfection, but toward wholeness, toward becoming all of who you are. Especially the parts you've rejected, buried, or labeled as weak. In this context, fear is not the enemy of growth, it is the map. When you treat fear as a teacher rather than a threat, the road begins to change. You stop asking how to get rid of it and start wondering what it's showing you. And slowly, what once felt like a locked door becomes a passage. You begin to realize that the fear you've been avoiding may be the exact thing you need to face in order to become who you were always meant to be. Picture it, standing at the edge of a decision that could redefine you, moving to a new city, leaving a relationship that no longer fits, shedding an identity you've outgrown. And fear rises, loud, convincing, whispering old warnings and ancient doubts. Stay where it's safe. Don't risk it. But look closer. That fear's not the voice of danger. It's the voice of your own becoming. It's there because something sacred lives on the other side. Something real. Something that can't be reached unless you walk through. Over and over again, the message repeats. Fear is not here to block your path. It is the path. It deserves your full attention, not to be silenced, not to be pushed into the background, but to be listened to intently, patiently, and with care. Because what you resist doesn't go away. It waits. It reshapes itself. It shows up later, stronger, more tangled, more confusing. Jung's words echo here. What you resist persists. And he was right. Avoidance may feel like relief in the short term, but in the shadows, as fear only grows, it finds other ways to speak. Through anxiety that won't settle, through patterns that sabotage your progress, through relationships that end the same way over and over again. But When you stop running, when you sit with fear and look it in the eyes, something begins to shift. Its grip loosens. It stops roaring and starts whispering. And in that whisper is the truth. That fear was never meant to destroy you. It was trying to lead you back to yourself. Freedom in the deepest sense isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to move forward while fear walks beside you, not chained to your ankles, not dragging you down, but walking quietly, like a loyal companion who once misunderstood you and is now showing you the way. You begin by listening, by asking. When fear appears, instead of pushing it away, ask, "What am I truly afraid of?" And wait. Let the answers come in layers. Write them down. No judgment, no need to fix. Let your curiosity unravel the knots inside you, and then go deeper, into the parts of yourself you've tried to disown. The versions of you you've hidden because someone once said they were too much or not enough. These are your shadow aspects, and they are not your enemies. They are messengers carrying the stories you weren't ready to hear. Let them speak. Ask them why they were cast out, what they want you to see. Give them space, and you'll realize that they've been holding pieces of your wholeness all along. Pay attention to your dreams. They aren't random flickers of imagination. Jung believed dreams are the voice of the unconscious, the deepest part of your psyche trying to break through. That nightmare that rattled you awake, that strange symbol you keep seeing, they're not accidents, they're riddles from within. And decoding them may reveal exactly what you've been missing in your waking life. And watch the roles you're playing. The hero, the wounded child, the wise elder, the rebel, the seeker. These aren't just characters and stories. They are living energies inside you. Ask yourself which ones are active right now. Are you in the middle of a quest, standing at the edge of your own transformation, or confronting your own dragon? And above all, walk toward discomfort. You don't have to leap. You don't have to conquer. But you do have to approach. One step, that's all. One conscious step in the direction of fear tells you not to go. Not to be reckless, but to be brave. Because what lays just beyond your resistance is rarely chaos. It's often clarity. It's something your soul has been trying to show you, over and over. In the only language it knows, fear's not a malfunction. It's not a flaw in your system. It is a signal, a map, a message. It reveals the terrain of your soul. It lights up the areas you've neglected. The parts of you that need more attention, more compassion, more truth. And Jung's greatest gift was to show us that we are not powerless in the face of fear. We are not victims of it. We are students. We are alchemists. We are meant to use it, to listen, to integrate, to grow. Because every time we treat fear as the enemy, we disconnect from the very process that can heal us. But the moment we invite it in, it begins to soften. It begins to teach. Fear is not here to keep you small. It's here to show you where you're still hiding. And when you're willing to meet it, not as an adversary, but as a teacher, you begin to see that the place you fear most is often the exact place where your transformation lives. So the next time fear rises, pause. Don't brace, don't run, greet it, ask it what it wants to show you. Listen with an open heart. And in doing so, you won't just face your fear, you'll finally begin to know yourself.